What's up, everybody, and welcome into the Phillip Jordan Show on this glorious Wednesday. It is Hump Day. I am your host, Phillip Jordan from Last Word on College Football and 96.9 The Legend in Dothan, Alabama, where I'm the in-studio host and producer, Dothan Wolves Football. Got a fun show planned for you guys today. On today's show, we'll be talking Wake Forest, Clemson, and the ACC with Tony Siracusa from Last Word on College Football. Of course, you guys know I write over at Last Word on College Football covering the Auburn Tigers. We will look back at what happened between Wake Forest and Clemson. What is different about the Wake Forest program? And we'll look around. We'll look at some big matchups coming up in the ACC this weekend. You got Clemson and NC State. Is that the biggest game in the history of NC State football? We'll also look at Florida State and Wake Forest as well, and just some other interesting stuff going around the Atlantic Coast Conference. You can check out the Phillip Jordan Show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're on Apple Podcasts, please follow, rate, and review. Leave a review. I will read it on a future edition of the show. You can also watch the show over on YouTube at the Phillip Jordan Sports YouTube channel. Just hit the subscribe button, hit the bell for all the notifications so you'll know when there's a new video, and leave a comment on the video. I'll read that on a future edition of the show as well. Everybody hanging out with us next is managing editor over at Last Word on College Football. Of course, you know, where I write for covering Auburn Tigers. We've got Tony Siracusa coming to the show today, and he is covering Wake Forest Demon Deacons now out there in the ACC. Tony, it's always good to have you on the show. First time since I've had you on the East Coast.
Yeah, that's true. Hey, Phillip, glad to do it. And yeah, since I got moved out to North Carolina a week before spring camp started. So it has been jumping into the frying pan literally since we've been out here.
So when you left California, did Chip Kelly give you a going away present or anything like that?
I think I'd like to think that Chip misses me, but I'm quite certain that he does not. There's probably a little less eye rolling at some of the media questions with me not being there. Certainly, he liked to accuse me as well as Ben Bolch, the writer from the LA Times, of being the big picture guys. We asked too many big picture questions, and he would routinely say, you know, we're just here trying to have a great Tuesday at practice, and you know, it would make us roll our eyes, but that's just who he is. So it's a different environment out here for sure. Dave Clawson spends significantly more time with the media than Chip Kelly ever would imagine doing. So we get a little bit more access out here at Wake Forest than we did at UCLA.
Yeah, you know, going into that transition from covering UCLA to Wake Forest. So, you know, before you got there, what was kind of like your thoughts, your preconceived notions, you know, of the Wake Forest program before you got there, started covering them?
That they, you know, an up and coming program that it took Dave Clawson a while to get it to where he wanted it to be, what his vision was. And, you know, I had an interview with John Curry, the athletic director at Wake Forest during the summer. And I asked him, I said, is it possible that Clawson got more time to do this than he would have at most other schools? Because the expectations historically were lower at Wake Forest than they were at a lot of other schools. I mean, Wake Forest, for those who don't know, is the smallest school in any of the Power 5 conferences. Its undergrad is a little less than 6,000 total undergrad. Its stadium is 31,000 people, tick under 32,000. So it is the smallest Power 5 school. And Curry took exception to my question because he wanted to say, look, it's not that we expect less or we're okay with less, but honestly, yeah, he probably got a little bit more time. I mean, because you and I, you know, we cover this daily. Coaches get fired 2-3 years into their contract. Clawson is in year 8. He got a lot of time before he went 11-3 last year, and it was a hugely successful year last year. It was, you know, one of the most successful seasons in Wake Forest history. So my picture of it coming out here and making the drive cross country was, and then waiting another 3 weeks for our furniture to get here, was that, you know, it's very up and coming. Clawson is the right guy for the program because he understands you're not going to get 4- and 5-star recruits in there with those academics. He's not concerned about it. He will tell you, I don't care about the recruiting rankings. I mean, I think right now they're like 60th in the country for the upcoming early signing class in December. His thing is, let's get them in and then we'll develop them into 4 or 5-star caliber players. And you look, they had several guys from last year's graduating class go on to the NFL. And so it works. It takes longer that way than it does if you're another school that is automatically coming in and getting those 5-star recruits. A lot of those guys wouldn't be able to do it Dave Clawson's way. You and I both know those 4 and 5-star recruits, they've been pampered their whole life, and they've always had people in their ear since they were freshmen in high school telling them how great they are. They're not going to wait 3 to 4 years to develop. But if you look at Wake Forest roster, it is full of, and part of this is because of the COVID year where the NCAA waived everybody's use of their eligibility that year. But you look at their roster right now, and it's full of 5- and 6-year players. There's even a 7th-year offensive lineman because of a medical redshirt. So and for the next 2 to 3 years, he's going to have, again, a roster full of guys who've been waiting their turn. So the roster is going to be full of 3rd, 4th, and 5th-year players. I don't think in today's environment with the transfer portal, you would see a lot of that kind of patience out of the athletes and the time given to the coaches to develop. But now he's got a winner. So now he's proven his method worked for that school. Might not work at other places, but it worked there. So he got a contract extension in December. He's got a long leash to do what he needs to do.
Yeah, and then obviously going back on this past Saturday, big game there at Wake Forest with Clemson. Now, if I had told you, if we'd done a preview interview for it, if I told you Wake Forest would score 45 points against Clemson, what would you have said to me?
I would have believed it because Clemson's offense has never been the problem the last couple of years. I would have said it's totally viable, especially we weren't sure. We had heard rumors back and forth as to whether Xavier Thomas was going to be able to suit up for Clemson. He didn't. He didn't make the trip and still physically isn't ready to go from his foot and ankle injury. I would have found it believable. The question would have been the defense, and it was, look, I mean, it was a tough game. We had written beforehand, this is the year you need to beat Clemson. You match up with them well, position for position, skill position for skill position. The last time Wake Forest beat Clemson was 2008. And the last 4 years, the margin of victory for Clemson has been in the range of 38.5 points. So they've been blowouts. This was the year. I think the title of our article is something along the line of, if not now, when? It was a tough loss for Wake Forest to swallow. It really was. And you could see it in the players in the post-game press conference. You could see it, look, it was a sold-out crowd at Wake Forest, a lot of energy put into it. And it was a terrific game, but a lot of what Clawson is going to have to do this week, and, as you and I sit here and record this, and, the team already met on Sunday and went through the game film and starting to prepare for the next game, is have to get the team's emotions kind of reined in a little bit. Ironically enough, he had to do that the week before also. They beat Liberty, but it was far closer than it should have been. They needed a defensive stop on a 2-point conversion to beat Liberty. And the players on Sunday were hanging their head. Clawson told us, I had to tell them, guys, you won. Act like you won. We're not, there was a lot that needs to be cleaned up, a lot that needs to be fixed, but we're not going to hang our heads after wins, because then it stops being fun to play this game. This is different. This was hard. Michael Juergens, the starting center, was fighting back tears in the post-game press conference because he took it so hard. And he said, with all the time and effort and snaps that we devoted to this game, we had this circled on our calendars. We knew how big it was. And to come up with this loss in double overtime, he said, it just hurts. It just absolutely hurts. Sam Hartman, the quarterback, was in a different kind of way about it. He was pissed. He was outwardly angry. The week before against Liberty, he'd given himself a D grade for his performance in the game. This, someone said, what grade do you give? And he said, we lost, so it's a failure. And he had a couple of other answers. He clearly didn't want to be there. And at some point, he just walked out before we were done answering questions. So there, I have no doubt that Sunday there was a lot of time spent to kind of reining in these guys' emotions and getting them refocused for what was next.
Yeah, the game was quite interesting too, with kind of the ebb and flow of it, because it started out Clemson jumps up 14-0. I mean, their first after Wake Forest punts on their first possession, you get Clemson gets the ball. First play, Will Shipley goes 53 yards with it, and then like I said, they go up 14-0. But then Wake Forest went on a 28-6 scoring run. After that 14-0, deficit Wake Forest had, what were you seeing there at the game out of the Wake Forest defense? Because it really looked like Wake Forest had really taken control of the game at that point.
There were issues early on, which look, because the score was 20-14 at halftime in favor of Clemson, it looked like a close game and it looked balanced. But when you break down the stats, it wasn't as close as you would think. Wake Forest had 6 possessions in the first half. 3 of them were three and out drives. You're asking a lot of your defense to stay on the field, that length of time. The time of possession in that first half was 22 minutes for Clemson, 8 for Wake Forest. So when you look at those kinds of stats, it really was pretty startling. There was like a 21 play differential in how many plays Clemson had run on offense and how many Wake Forest had run. So on the scoreboard, it was close, but you worried about the toll this was going to take on a defense, which is a new defense for Clemson, right? I mean, they brought in Brad Lambert from Purdue to kind of, make it a more aggressive defense. They did a good job. They did a good, there were some big plays. Where they struggled was with DJ Uiagalelei, who, no one is going to mistake him for being fleet of foot. He isn't. He dropped 30 pounds in the offseason to become more athletic. When you look at the guy, though, man, his calves are still the size of tree trunks, man. I mean, the dude's huge. But what was happening was they would get pressure. They couldn't get him down on contact. He was keeping the plays alive. He was, stepping up in the pocket after someone's grabbing at him and keeping a run alive for 3-4 yards, or keeping a pass play open. And you start to worry about the toll that it takes on the defense. Sam Hartman had obviously a terrific game. I mean, both quarterbacks did, Hartman was 20 of 29 for 337 yards and 6 touchdowns. That 6 touchdowns broke his own school record for most touchdown passes in a game. So there was that, but the Clemson defensive backs were getting burned repeatedly early on. They had 5 pass interference calls against them, and 3 of them were because they literally were pulling down the receiver who'd beaten them. Better to get the 15 yards than give up the touchdown, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. So they started, Clemson, they altered the defense. They shored up the defensive backs and dropped more guys back and forced Wake Forest to run, which they weren't doing that well prior to that. They're picking up a little bit more, but in the fourth quarter, you saw Wake Forest really abandon the passing game completely. Hartman threw 2 passes in the fourth quarter. The rest of the offense was running. Look, I'm not going to question the offensive coordinator, Wayne Ruggiero, who makes the offensive play calls during the game. When Hartman's that hot, I would have liked to have seen the ball in his hands a few more times at the end. Maybe in that last drive in regulation before they punted, maybe another 2-3 passes out of Hartman in that game, because you get to the point where you're taking what the defense gives you. If you want to be at that next level, you got to impose yourself on the defense. right? And you've got to say, we're going to do this until you stop us. And Wake Forest hadn't been stopping them, even with the alteration in the defense. What happens is the coaches up in the booth, they see the defense has changed. Okay, now we're going to change the offense. I would have liked to have seen them go at that defense with Hartman's arm a few more times before they went exclusively to the run.
And early on when they got down 14-0, I know, especially when they scored that season, him and Jamal Banks, 6 catches, 141, 2 touchdowns. He also had 2 to Donovan Green, and then A.T. Perry also had 2 there as well, which is A.T.'s top 5 in ACC in receiving yards so far. But he was kind of not the guy that Hartman was going to. It was Jamal Banks, and early on they had pretty good connection going on, hitting some really big plays down the field.
Yeah, Banks is a special receiver. I know A.T. Perry gets all the attention. He was preseason all ACC and so on, and on the watch list for the Biletnikoff and all of that. Donovan Green missed all of last year when he blew out his knee, and you see the guy, the way he came back and bulked up his lower body. His upper body was already freakishly athletic, so now he's got the lower body strength because of the rehab on the knee. And just fantastically athletic. And Jamal Banks, I mean, I want to see the guy get more throws his way, because he will go up at the pinnacle of the throw and go get the ball, and just will out athletic. I don't think that's really a phrase. I think if you wrote that in an article, I'd probably cut it out, as we edit the article. But he will out athletic most defensive backs. And so they really have 3 starting receivers. When you look, 3 wideouts, and then you look at Taylor Morin and the slot, and they really have those 4 guys that can go to at any time. And again, to me, that kind of reinforces, take a couple more shots against this defensive secondary, and let's see what you get out of it. Make them stop you.
On the other side, we're Clemson, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe Clemson quarterback DJ, that you actually saw him when he was in high school. Where did he come from?
I did. St. John Bosco in Southern California. Yeah, I will say this: one of the most a game that people will be talking about they still talk about, and they'll talk about for years, a state high school championship game. And just think about, as college football fans, think about these 2 quarterbacks going at each other. It was DJ Uiagalelei for St. John Bosco, and it was Bryce Young for Mater Dei going at each other in the state high school championship game. Man, it was just a shootout for the ages.
Man, imagine now. Look, if anybody was at that game, just if they could think back and just say, "Wow, I was at that game where these 2 guys are going at it." Yeah. He's got a lot of criticism from last year. Going in last year, he was anointed. After the Notre Dame game in 2020, when he came in for Trevor Lawrence, he was anointed as the next great Clemson quarterback. It just didn't work out last year, which I don't think he had the parts around him that maybe Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence had.
That's right.
But then, of course, you talked about the coming in this year, he lost weight, but everybody wants to put Cade Klubnik, especially after the Georgia Tech game. He comes in that last series. Okay, that is what it is. It's, they're not playing as hard. He's trying to make some plays. That situation is what it is. But see, like there's always that talk. Is DJ one bad game away from Cade Klubnik being the quarterback? So what was your takeaway? Because he did in this game, he played really well. 26 of 41, 371, 5 touchdowns, and 52 yards rushing. He's 3rd in ACC in passing yards right now. But he looks like he has improved. What was your big takeaway from him going from where he's been last year and now up to this game?
You bring up a really good point about the parts around him, because at ACC Media Days, he was one of the players that Clemson brought there. And I asked Dabo Swinney directly, I said, is this to be taken as a vote of confidence for DJ? Because clearly, about all the criticism on the Clemson fan boards, and everyone's favorite player is always the backup quarterback, right? They always want to see who's next, right? And Dabo had an interesting take. He said, 1, I don't care what the people on the fan board say. I don't need them to tell me who and what DJ is. I know this kid. I love this kid. He's my quarterback, period. You still got the sense, though, that he was going to have a short leash if he didn't start off well. But one of the things, and this really kind of blends with what you said, is the parts weren't around him last year. He had a terrible offensive line last year. They had injuries, they had youth, and it really wasn't very good. One of the things Swinney brought up before the season was DJ was making the same mistakes that a young Deshaun Watson made and a young Trevor Lawrence made. The difference is they had the parts around them that could cover over those mistakes. Clemson didn't have that last year. And so DJ's mistakes, got a brighter light. I think Saturday, it's last Saturday is debatable whether it was his first or second best game of his Clemson career. I mean, I put it up there with the Notre Dame game when he was replacing an injured Trevor Lawrence in 2020. I put it right up there with that one. He looked comfortable in the pocket. He looked confident. He wasn't getting happy feet, looking for what's next, looking for he was staying with his progressions. And he looked like a different quarterback than he was last year.
Yeah, I thought that going in. And look, and I was one that's critical too. I mean, I was kind of like saying, okay, when's K. Clemson going to get to play? Because I've, was seeing the struggles of DJ, but he played really well, and he's played well this year. Really shown that that improvement after last year. Now, just looking at this Saturday, and we're going back to Wake Forest. We were talking, for people to know, off air, and everybody knows or doesn't know, I'm in Southeast Alabama area, so we're kind of waiting on this, see what the Hurricane's going to do, and that could impact this game. But as we're sitting here recording this on a Monday evening, Wake Forest does go to Florida State. 23rd ranked Florida State. Mike Norvell's got this team turned around, and I know there was a lot of talk of Deion Sanders in Florida State. I don't think Deion's going to be the head coach at Florida State anytime soon. Mike Norvell's got this team turned around. Jordan Travis is talking about quarterback showed improvement. That is one that has showed great improvement. They run the ball well. They're top 5 in defense and points allowed in the ACC, yards allowed, and sacks. So going into this game, Wake Forest and Florida State, how do you see this these two teams matching up?
This is a tough matchup. It's a tough matchup for Wake Forest. One, again, you have to emotionally turn the page on what happened last week and move on. You're gonna, when we talk to Dave Clawson later this week, he's gonna tell us they're preparing like it's any other week, not knowing what's going to happen with the Hurricane. There is talk of moving the game somewhere else or, postponing it, but they're all, the ACC is involved. Both schools are involved. I took note on Monday afternoon that Florida State has canceled classes on Thursday and Friday, but then issued a statement that they intend for the game to go on as scheduled. So, priorities, I suppose, right? But look, Jordan Travis offers a different kind of challenge than Uiagalelei does, because even though DJ had those, whatever was 52 yards rushing, most of it was on 1 or 2 plays. All right. Jordan Travis is a legitimate wide threat. And so he offers a different kind of challenge, a little bit more like what Caden Salter did with Liberty. He's not quite the speed threat on the edge that Salter was, but he does have that athletic ability. He's having a great year. Look, the ACC, no disrespect to any other conference, the ACC right now is the conference of quarterbacks. It just is. Right. I mean, you've got Leary at North Carolina State. You've got Hartman. You've got DJ. You've got Travis. You've got other guys who, frankly, should be doing better. Brennan at Virginia and so on. Who aren't. But nonetheless, it's a very deep quarterback conference, and so Travis is kind of getting lost in the mix. He's not the one everyone's talking about, but he's having a vastly improved season over last year. I mean, he's throwing at a 66% completion rate right now, which is about as good as you can ask of any quarterback. I think that when you look at what happened last Saturday against Boston College, Mike Norvell, we were on his weekly press conference today, Monday, and he talked about how it was the most complete game as a team that Florida State has played in a very long time, maybe even going through last year. That Travis was just in a rhythm with his receivers. The offense was clicking. The defense was, spectacular. I mean, they held Boston College to about 235 yards total offense for the entire game. So they're playing their best football right now as Wake Forest comes to town. It is a hefty challenge. If you're Wake Forest, man, even though even though Florida State's in the Coastal Division, you can't afford back-to-back conference losses. You just can't. Or they in the Atlantic Division rather. But point being, you can't afford back-to-back losses.
I'll be glad if this conferences just get rid of these divisions.
Well, and they are next year. They are next year. Which here's the irony. You look at next year, the ACC goes without conferences. Top 2 teams make the playoffs, and that's why it still gets jumbled in my brain sometimes. But if you look right now, the Coastal is wide open with Pitt and Miami, and Miami is not really good right now, and we're not sure about Pitt. But you look at the Atlantic, and you look at the teams, and they're the best teams in the conference are in the Atlantic, and they're going to wind up eating each other alive, whether it's North Carolina State, Clemson, Florida State, Wake Forest, whatever the case may be. They're going to eat each other alive, and this is why you get rid of the divisions.
Yeah. I went out right before we got on. I was just writing down the standings just to kind of reflect back.
Right.
And it's loaded on the Atlantic, and then the Coastal is not very good.
No.
A big matchup for the Atlantic this Saturday too. You just got to see Clemson play. They are playing NC State, and I got to say this has got to be, if not the biggest, one of the biggest games in the history of North Carolina State football.
It is. It is the biggest game. They need to win this because they do a lot of talking at North Carolina State, and they've had a chip on their shoulder really since the end of last year when they got the rug pulled out from under them when the Holiday Bowl got canceled. And they spent the entire offseason talking about unfinished business. And I kept thinking, you need to move past that and get on to what's next. They are playing really well. Devin Leary is one of the better quarterbacks in the country. But this is a put up or shut up game for North Carolina State. It really is. Their linebacking core, really their front 7, but their linebacking core is as good as anyone in the country right now. And so, but the game's at Clemson, and which is a tough place to play for visitors. To me, it's one of the best games in the country this week. There are a handful of really good games. This is one of the better matchups. And it's painful for Wake Forest fans. You need to root for North Carolina State because you need Clemson to take a couple of losses. You still have North Carolina State down the road on the schedule, so you can take care of business with them. Because there's no love lost with the Wake Forest fan base and the North Carolina State fan base. And so it's painful, but they need to. Look, they're a top 10 team now. They need to prove that they belong there.
It's gonna be funny. That's gonna be that's the primetime game. ESPN.
Absolutely.
I mean, they're getting all the treatment. I guess NC State, welcome to the big time.
Right. And Leary versus DJ is a great quarterback matchup. It should be just as good as the Hartman versus DJ game was.
When you break a record of Phillip Rivers, you've done something at NC State.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, he's good. He's a vocal team leader. But like I said, that defense at NC State, that front 7 and that linebacking group is as good as you're going to see anywhere. But can you again? You need to play. You need to be emotional. Football is a game where you play pumped up, but at some point early on, you got to gather yourself and you got to be thinking out there. And NC State has been building up for this for so long. Can they do that for Clemson? Clemson plays big games all the time. People talk about how last year was a down year for Clemson. They went 10-3. It wasn't that bad. It was bad by Clemson standards because they didn't win the division, didn't win the conference, didn't go to the playoffs. So it's an off year. You went 10-3. There's a whole slew of teams out there that would have given, tons of their athletic department budget to go 10-3. So Clemson's used to the big stage. They're used to the big stage at home. This is a time for NC State to prove that they've graduated to the next level.
Real quickly, we're nearing 30 minutes here on the show, but Georgia Tech, they opened up Monday that officially, but Sunday you started seeing the stories coming out that was going to open at 80 and everything. I've seen people try to link Deion, which Deion Sanders is a legend in Atlanta. If I don't know how he would do at a Power 5, but I've seen that stuff. But what is Georgia Tech? What kind of job is that in your opinion?
It should be a good job. It's Atlanta. You don't recruiting. I mean, yes, it's a tough school to get into academically, but the recruiting landscape is there. And with only 2 major schools in the state, I mean, you should be able to do that. You should be able to pull that off. But I also think that they were cursed because you had all these kids who came to play for Paul Johnson and the triple option offense, and Johnson leaves, and you bring in a new coach, and he's stuck with all these players that were there to run a different offense. We were surprised when Jeff Collins was even at ACC Media Days that they hadn't already replaced him. So this was the writing on the wall. I hope Dion doesn't take it. I think there are better jobs for him because this is going to be a 4 to 5 year rebuild that's necessary at Georgia Tech, and I don't think anyone wants to put that on Dion.
Yeah, I think that's twice I've mentioned Dion in this podcast. So
Right.
I think that's a
he's going to get a big time job. He's done well where he is. I love how he promotes HBCUs. I love that. He's going to get offers, and one day he's going to say yes. I hope it's not to this one. I think it's the wrong place for him.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting where he goes. His name's been mentioned for Auburn too. So the prime time, but hey, that would be a good partnership with him and Saban with the commercials they do together.
That would be funny.
The Auburn, Alabama coach. But anyways, Tony, it's been fun having you on here talking Clemson-Wake Forest, talking about the ACC, just all things college football. If the listeners and viewers want to follow you online, where can they find you?
Well, as you well know, they can find us at Last Word on Sports. You go to that.com, you click on the college football link, and go to the great work by yourself, of course, and the 22 other writers that we have across the country covering the sport. We've got the Facebook page, we've got the Twitter feed at Last Word on CFB, and if they want to come on and argue with me, they can find me at Tony Bruin. I did not change it to Demon Deacon Tony when I moved out here or anything like that. I had that handle long before I even started covering UCLA back whenever. So I just kept it. So they can find me on Twitter at Tony Bruin.
Hey, it's just like me. I'm trying to do more than the SEC, but my Twitter handle is still P Jordan SEC.
So there you go.
It only causes a stir when I have a Big Ten guest. That's the only time it causes a stir, I think. But anyways.
No doubt.
But anyways, Tony, I appreciate the time, and I look forward to doing it again sometime down the road.
All right, man. Glad to do it.
I once again, thanks to Tony Siracusa for coming on the show. Of course, managing editor, Last Word on College Football. Go check us out. Check out Last Word on College Football. A lot of great writers, a lot of great content on covering the great sport that is college football. And I'll be back tomorrow. I'm not going to tell you who the guest is tomorrow because as of this recording, I'm not sure. We have one, but I'm not sure who it's going to be. But you'll check out in the feed. You'll check out in the feed on who will be on the show. Remember, you can find the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. If you're on Apple Podcasts, please follow, rate, and review. Leave a review. I will read it on a future edition of the show. You can also check out the show over on YouTube, Phillip Jordan Sports YouTube channel. Just hit the subscribe button, hit the bell for all notifications, and leave a comment on YouTube. And I will read that on a future edition of the show as well. You can also check out the Wiregrass High School Football Report and the Jed Kennedy Coaches Show over there as well. I don't talk much on the Jed Kennedy Coaches Show. I mainly just produce that one, but Jerry and Ken do a great job chatting with Coach Kennedy every single week. So please go check that out. You can follow me on social media at pjordansec. You can also email me at sports.phillipjordan@gmail.com. Hope you all have a great day. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye-bye.